This is how you teach your son's wife a lesson. Madison, my mother-in-law, said while looking at my face covered in cream, laughing so hard she nearly fell over. Mom, that's too much. Why are you so upset? It's just a little surprise. Exactly. The bride shouldn't look so serious. Come on, smile, smile. Beside Madison, who was holding her stomach from laughing, stood Catherine, my sister-in-law, pointing her smartphone camera straight at me. Meanwhile, Christopher, my father-in-law, stood on the sidelines, watching the whole scene unfold as if it didn't concern him at all. My mind was spinning. How did it come to this? Watch it had been the happiest moment of my life. My wedding day was completely ruined by my in-laws. Could there be a greater humiliation? I could feel the emotions I had tried to suppress finally reaching its limit. I'm leaving. With those words, I grabbed the hem of my dress and began walking slowly toward the exit doors of the venue. But just as I was about to leave, Madison's scream echoed throughout the hall, and what followed was something none of us could have predicted. My name is Abigail. I'm 26 years old. I lost my dad when I was just a little girl, and ever since, it's been just me and my mom, Taylor. There were times when I felt a pang of loneliness not having a dad around, but the love and bond I shared with my mom more than made up for it. My mom is a strong and kind woman. She worked tirelessly while still making time to watch over me, guiding me with care and devotion. That's why I've always wanted to repay her someday, dedicating myself fully to my studies, and later to my work. I lost my dad when I was only 5. It was a sudden accident. Though my mom never talked much about it, I don't remember much from that time, but I still have a vivid memory of her holding back tears. After Dad passed, we moved closer to Grandma's house. Adjusting to the new environment wasn't easy, but thanks to Mom's unwavering kindness, I grew up with a positive outlook on life, refusing to let my circumstances make me bitter. I met my husband, William, when I was 23. I first met him when I visited a client's office for a business meeting. My initial impression was that he was calm and seemed trustworthy. William wasn't much of a talker, but his words carried a strange weight. Above all, he had a natural way of being considerate to those around him, and I found myself drawn to that. Our relationship began to develop about 6 months after we met. One day, after our usual meeting had ended and I was about to leave the office, he suddenly spoke to me. "Do you have little time after this?" Something about his question piqued my curiosity, and before I realized it, I found myself saying I did have time. William was relieved at my answer and, though visibly nervous, invited me to a nearby cafe. Our conversation that day mostly revolved around work, but his gentle tone and warm smile made me feel comfortable. From that point on, our relationship slowly but steadily grew deeper. Despite our busy schedules, we made time to see each other and carefully cherished the moments we shared. Whenever he noticed I was overwhelmed by my workload, he would often say, "You don't have to push yourself so hard." Every time he showed me that kind of kindness, I felt reassured and knew he truly cared for me. Then, in the winter of my 25th year, he invited me to dinner with a more serious expression than usual. Sensing that it was a special occasion, I felt a little nervous inside. His demeanor made me anticipate something significant was about to happen. After a slightly awkward meal, during dessert, he suddenly stood up and pulled out a small box from his pocket. Inside the box was a simple yet beautiful ring that immediately caught my eye, a sight I still remember vividly to this day. "Abigail, will you marry me?" His quiet words carried an unwavering determination, and in that moment, my heart was filled with warmth. I knew, deep down, that with him, I could face any future that awaited us. Without hesitation, I said, yes. My voice sounded so natural that even I was surprised. And just like that, we became officially engaged. Mom cried tears of joy, and I should have been on top of the world. But during our engagement, I couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. The source of that unease was his family. My relationship with William's family felt awkward. His family was what you'd call an elite household. William's father, Christopher, his mother, Madison, and his sister, Catherine, were all highly educated and successful. Madison, in particular, was a sharp and capable CEO of her own cosmetics company. It was clear that Madison wasn't happy about my marriage to William. She never said it outright, but her cold demeanor and subtle comments made her disapproval obvious. The first time I was invited to their home, I nervously greeted Madison with the warmest smile I could muster. "Hello, I'm Abigail. Thank you for inviting me today." Madison, after a brief pause, replied without expression, "Well, come on in." Was I not welcome here? Her tone was so devoid of warmth that I couldn't help but feel that way. As we stepped into their spacious living room, I was immediately struck by the sight of the neatly arranged, expensive-looking furniture. Feeling overwhelmed, I found solace in William's gentle touch as he held my hand for support. That small gesture was my only comfort. At dinner, after exchanging formal greetings, I was bombarded with questions from Madison. "So, Abigail, which university did you graduate from?" "I graduated from a local college." "Ah, I see." I didn't miss the slight stiffening of Madison's expression as I mentioned my alma mater. Seeing her reaction, a bead of sweat trickled down my back. Madison, like Christopher and Catherine, had attended a prestigious private university. Whenever the topic of education came up, I found myself shrinking in my seat. Catherine, to her credit, was relatively friendly and tried to engage me in conversations about work and hobbies. But Madison's piercing gaze made it impossible for me to fully enjoy the conversation. Moreover, the fact that I was raised in a fatherless household seemed to be another significant issue for Madison. As dinner progressed, Madison casually asked, "What kind of work does your mother do?" "She's retired now, but she used to work at a local supermarket." "Taylor's amazing." She worked day and night, holding multiple jobs to put Abigail through college. "Wow, that's impressive. I could never do that myself." Working part-time at a supermarket, Madison's words carried an unmistakable air of prejudice toward my upbringing. With every word she spoke, my heart grew colder and more rigid. Sensing my discomfort, William frequently stepped in to help, but the heavy, dark emotions in my chest refused to dissipate. On the way home, William held my hand as he looked down and said, "I'm sorry about everything Mom said. I'll talk to her about it later. But no matter what my family thinks, I'm marrying you, Abigail. Don't let their opinions bother you." While his reassurance warmed me, it was impossible not to feel affected. I desperately wanted to be accepted by William's family, but the gap between that hope and the reality was insurmountable. Would Madison and the rest of his family ever accept me? Would my marriage to William truly bring happiness? These questions swirled in my mind, leading to many sleepless nights. Even so, I tried my best to build a relationship with my in-laws by sending flowers and gifts for their birthdays. And finally, the long-awaited day of the wedding arrived. The makeup carefully done than ever before, and the white wedding dress Mom and I had chosen together. I stood next to William, waiting to walk down the aisle. It felt as if I were in a dream. After a long journey, I was finally about to start a new life with William. The wedding had about 100 guests. To my surprise, most of them were related to his in-laws, and it quickly turned into a large-scale wedding. Our friends and family were also there, showering us with warm words of congratulations. "Abigail, I wish you all the happiness in the world." With Mom's tearful gaze watching over me, William and I exchanged vows of eternal love in the chapel. And then it was time for the reception. The program was running smoothly, and the venue was filled with the smiles of our guests. The pleasant atmosphere of the reception was disrupted just as my nerves began to ease, and I started to relax. Suddenly, Madison stood up, grabbed a microphone, and stepped onto the stage. "Everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I actually have a little surprise for the bride, Abigail." As Madison's voice echoed through the venue, a chill ran down my spine. I had a bad feeling about this, but the cheers from the guests left me no choice but to stand there quietly. Here's the surprise. A large cake was brought out in front of me. It was beautifully decorated, a luxurious centerpiece fitting for a wedding reception. But then, something unthinkable happened. Without warning, Madison suddenly smashed the cake into my face. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The cream spread all over my face and dripped onto my dress. My vision turned white, and I could barely catch my breath. The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted into laughter. Madison, the perpetrator, was laughing hysterically. Catherine joined in, laughing at the sight of me. "This is how you teach your son's wife a lesson," Madison said, looking at my cream-covered face and laughing so hard she nearly fell over. I stood there in shock, unable to say a word. I could feel the confused stares of the other guests, but no one moved to intervene. Perhaps they were as stunned as I was. "Mom, that's too much," William said, his voice tinged with anger. But Madison brushed him off, continuing to laugh. "Why are you so upset? It's just a little surprise." "Exactly. The bride shouldn't look so serious. Come on, smile, smile." Beside Madison, who was doubled over in laughter, Catherine pointed her smartphone camera at me. Christopher, meanwhile, stood on the sidelines, watching as if it didn't concern him. My mind was in chaos. How had it come to this? What was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, my wedding day, had been utterly ruined by Madison. Could there be a greater humiliation? I could feel the emotions I had tried to suppress finally reaching its limit. I took a deep breath and wiped the thick layer of cream off my face. I could feel every eye in the room on me, but I was no longer the woman who would cower in such a moment. "I'm leaving." Gathering the hem of my dress, I began to walk slowly toward the doors of the venue. There was no reason to stay in a place where I had been so humiliated. Sensing my determination, William followed me without a word. Madison, for a moment, looked shocked, her eyes widening, but her expression quickly turned to one of irritation. "Wait, what are you doing? The reception isn't over yet," Madison's voice called out from behind as she hurried after us. But I didn't look back. I gripped William's arm tightly and kept my eyes forward, heading straight for the exit of the venue. Then, suddenly, a scream echoed throughout the hall. "What are you doing? Stop it!" Instinctively, I turned around, and what I saw left me stunned. Madison had beer poured all over her head. Her meticulously done makeup and hair were completely ruined. Breathing heavily, Madison stood frozen, her face expressionless, and next to her, holding a beer bottle in his hand, stood James Anderson, the guest of honor at the reception, and one of Madison's business clients. James, a CEO managing multiple companies, was a renowned figure in the industry. Ignoring the murmurs of the crowd, He glared at Madison with a stern, unwavering expression. There was something so commanding about his presence that I couldn't take my eyes off him. The hall fell silent. In the stillness that seemed to freeze time, James spoke in a low, resonant voice. "Madison, I never realized you could be this shameless. I refuse to associate myself with someone so devoid of decency. From this moment on, I'm cutting all ties with your company." "Wait, Mr. Anderson, what's come over you? That was just a joke, a little entertainment. Abigail is just being too sensitive. Please don't take it seriously," Madison stammered, her face growing paler by the second. But James's expression remained cold. "You ruined a once-in-a-lifetime wedding for the sake of a joke or entertainment. No, I didn't mean. Do you have any idea how much Abigail has endured, losing her father and struggling to get to this point? How hard she's worked for her happiness. Anyone who tries to destroy that is unforgivable." James slammed the beer bottle down onto the table, the sound echoing through the hall. Once again, the room was enveloped in an icy silence. Madison stood speechless, frozen in place. After a few moments, the guests began to stir, their whispers growing louder, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about James's words. Abigail, who lost her father. It sounded as though he knew me personally. Could he have known my late father? Or perhaps he was connected to Mom. Confused, my pace slowed until William gently urged me forward, leading me out of the hall. As we stepped outside, a wave of relief began to wash over me. James had delivered justice on my behalf. It felt as though the weight I had carried for so long has disappeared. Later, in the dressing room, I removed my soiled dress, washed my face, and straightened myself up until a soft knock sounded at the door. When I opened it, Mom and James stood there. They entered the room quietly, their expressions solemn, carrying an air of tension. Mom locked eyes with me, her gaze steady and filled with a determined intensity. "Mom, Mr. Anderson?" I asked hesitantly, glancing between the two of them. Mom took a deep breath, her face resolute, and slowly began to speak. "Abigail, please listen. There's something I've always needed to tell you. Today seems to be the right time at last." "What is it? Does it have something to do with Mr. Anderson?" "Yes, Mr. Anderson was an old friend of your dad's." Her words left me wide-eyed with shock. A friend of Dad's? That James Anderson? I couldn't believe what Mom was saying, and stood frozen in place. Mr. Anderson looked at me silently, his expression dark. It was as if he were carrying a heavy burden. As I stood there in silence, Mom took a deep breath before she began to speak. "The truth is, your dad lost his life while traveling with Mr. Anderson." "What?" "They were driving on a mountain road when they were caught in a landslide. Mr. Anderson called for an ambulance, but unfortunately, it was too late." The story of Dad's final moments came out of nowhere. And to think that Mr. Anderson was there when Dad lost his life. In shock, I turned to look at Mr. Anderson, and his face twisted in pain. He was likely recalling the events of that day. Mom, noticing his distress, gently continued to speak, as if to support him. "Of course, it was a tragic accident, something no one could have prevented. But Mr. Anderson felt responsible and has kept an eye on us ever since. So that's why Mr. Anderson knew about me." "Yes, that's right. I was the one who invited your dad on that trip. My thoughtlessness led to you losing someone so precious. An apology isn't enough, but I'm deeply sorry, truly, I am." "No, please don't apologize. Mr. Anderson, it wasn't your fault." Hearing my words, he gave a faint smile and raised his head slightly. "Your mom said the same thing to me years ago. I wanted to help the two of you as some form of reparation, but no matter how many times I offered, Taylor refused. In the end, I could do nothing but watch over you both. The truth about Dad's accident and Mr. Anderson's guilt. It was all new to me, and my mind was overwhelmed, nearly at its breaking point. But then, a single question surfaced. Mom, why did you refuse Mr. Anderson's help? I asked, my voice trembling. Knowing how much Mom had struggled, I couldn't help but wonder why she had turned down his support. Mom smiled gently before answering. Of course, things were financially tough. I know I put you through a lot because of that. But you see, I wanted to prove something to your dad in heaven. I wanted to show him that I could raise you well on my own. I was deeply grateful for Mr. Anderson's kindness, but I didn't want to live a life dependent on him. Mr. Anderson nodded deeply at her words, and then spoke to me in a quiet voice. His low tone carried a certain nostalgic warmth. Abigail, your mom is truly a strong woman. In the end, I could do nothing but watch over you both. But what happened earlier, I just couldn't tolerate it. If your dad were still here, he wouldn't have allowed such disrespect. His words tightened my chest with emotion. I began to understand the weight of the guilt Mr. Anderson had carried over Dad's accident, and I saw, for the first time, the incredible resolve Mom had shown in raising me alone. The burdens they had carried for so many years were finally revealed to me. With heartfelt gratitude, I smiled at them both, and as I etched Dad's memory deeper into my heart, I began to think about how I should move forward with my life. But the tumultuous day wasn't over yet. As my conversation with Mom and Mr. Anderson ended, and I found myself alone again, the dressing room door suddenly burst open. Startled, I turned to see Madison standing there, her face pale, and breathing heavily. She had changed out of her beer-soaked dress into casual clothes, like me, with no makeup, and her hair hastily tied back. Her eyes, which seemed older than usual, carried a hint of desperation. I'm sorry, Abigail. Can we talk for a moment? Madison spoke politely, but I didn't respond. I couldn't tell what she wanted to say, but her unusually deferential attitude felt insincere. I'm sorry for what I did earlier, she said while walking towards me. Her voice was clearly forced, lacking any genuine remorse. About the cake, it was meant as a promotion for my cosmetics company. The cream is very gentle on the skin, and it was part of an entertaining performance. Could you help explain that to everyone? I blinked, momentarily stunned by her words. She was trying to frame that humiliating act as a promotional stunt for her cosmetics. Even as someone inexperienced in business, I could see how ridiculous her excuse was. But why was she suddenly scrambling to justify herself? The reason became clear almost immediately. The truth is, Mr. Anderson has decided to cut ties with my company, Madison said, her voice trembling. My cosmetics company depends on his business. So Abigail, could you please convince him to reconsider? Her words left me utterly astonished. She was trying to use me to save her business. Her so-called apology had no real intent, just a strategy to protect her own interests. The idea of dismissing the humiliation I endured as mere promotion filled me with anger. But before I could respond, a low voice came from outside the dressing room. That excuse won't work. Madison turned sharply, startled, to see Mr. Anderson standing in the doorway. It seemed he had been listening to the entire conversation. His calm expression was unchanged, but his eyes carried a sharp, unforgiving glint. A promotion? Do you really think anyone would buy that excuse? Using such disrespectful behavior as part of a cosmetics campaign is unheard of. My decision to cut ties with your company stands. Nothing has changed. Madison's face turned visibly paler at his words. She struggled to find something to say, but Mr. Anderson's resolute demeanor silenced her. Could you please leave? There's nothing left for us to discuss, I added firmly, and Madison hunched her shoulders and slowly left the dressing room. She is clearly too defeated to argue further. Once she was gone, I turned to face Mr. Anderson. Thank you. You've come to my rescue again. It's nothing at all. I hope you know that I want to help you more. Please don't hesitate to rely on me any time. Mr. Anderson looked at me with eyes full of kindness, and for a moment, I saw my dad in him. I thought to myself that once things settled down, I would like to hear more stories about Dad from him. However, even after the reception, I found no peace of mind. William and I had started living together in the new home we had prepared, but an unexpected problem arose in the most surprising way. One day, a friend who attended the wedding urged me to check social media immediately. When I did, I couldn't believe my eyes. Circulating online were posts about the cake incident at the reception. They claimed it was all part of a promotional stunt for a cosmetics company. And worse, that it had been my idea. Upon further investigation, I discovered something even more shocking. The posts had originated from an account using my name. There was only one person who could have orchestrated something so absurd. It had to be Madison. She was likely spreading false information to justify her actions during the reception. When I told William about it, he immediately agreed. She's capable of something like this. As William spoke quietly, his eyes held a trace of sadness. It had become clear that his own mother was resorting to underhanded tactics to tarnish my reputation. He must have been deeply unsettled inside. Yet, despite his inner turmoil, William resolved to act immediately. We need to confront Mom. This has to be cleared up. Though I couldn't predict how Madison would react, we couldn't leave the matter unresolved. For the sake of my reputation and our future together, it was time to settle things with Madison. Soon, we arrived at the in-laws' house. Though I had been there several times before, the air was heavy with a new kind of tension. When William rang the doorbell, Madison appeared shortly after. At the sight of us, her face flickered with a mix of surprise and unease, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. What brings you two here so suddenly? I'm a bit busy right now. Is there something you need? Her tone was polite, but she exuded an air of dismissal, as if ready to close the door at any moment. Refusing to be intimidated, I stepped forward and spoke in a calm, steady voice. This won't take long. We need to discuss the recent social media posts. Social media? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't really keep up with that sort of thing. Please don't play dumb. The posts claim that the incident at the reception was my idea. We've already begun filing a request to disclose the source of the information. No matter how long it takes, we'll prove your involvement. At the mention of legal action, I saw the color drain from Madison's face. She struggled to maintain composure, but her unease was evident. I don't know what you're talking about. You must be mistaken. Is that so? Then you won't mind if I correct a false information or even file a defamation lawsuit, since it has nothing to do with you, right? Her eyes widened in panic. A lawsuit? Wait, that's too extreme, she said, her voice trembling. Whether it's extreme or not isn't for you to decide. That's up to the victim, me, and a court. You ruined my wedding, and then compounded your wrongdoing to protect yourself. You'll need to take responsibility for your actions. That's all I have to say. Wait, please. Madison's face turned pale, and her entire body trembled. With a steady gaze fixed on her, William stepped forward this time. There's one more thing I need to tell you, Mom. I'm cutting ties with you and the rest of the family. From this moment, we are no longer family." Madison looked as though she might collapse. The shock was too much for her to process, unable to form any words. At some point, Catherine and Christopher had appeared near the doorway, listening to our conversation. Both of them were left speechless by William's sudden declaration, but William paid no attention to their reactions and continued to speak calmly. "Your actions and attitude toward Abigail have been beyond disrespectful, and as her husband, I can't overlook them. From now on, we will have no further contact with you or the rest of the family." As those words echoed through the entryway, Madison finally broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "Wait, William, please don't say that. You're my son. Why would you do this? I've chosen to build a new life with Abigail. I won't involve myself with you anymore. That's the path I've decided to take." Madison was stunned into silence, unable to respond. Behind her, Christopher and Catherine stood quietly, watching the situation unfold without saying a word. Through her sobs, Madison desperately reached out to William, but he didn't take her hand. Instead, he turned to me and gave me a warm smile. "Let's go, Abigail." I nodded silently, took William's hand, and together we left the in-laws' house. Madison's anguished cries echoed behind us, but I didn't look back. There was no place for them in the life William and I were building together. In the weeks that followed, news of Madison, Christopher, and Catherine's circumstances began to reach us. First, about Madison's cosmetics company. After Mr. Anderson severed ties with her business, her company quickly fell into financial trouble. Mr. Anderson's company had been one of her largest clients, and once he pulled out, other clients followed suit. Within the industry, Madison's actions were heavily criticized, and her reputation plummeted. The false social media posts became widely known, and with rumors of lawsuits circulating, she had no way to salvage her standing. As a result, Madison's company was forced to downsize within months, leading to significant layoffs. Ultimately, she was nearly blacklisted from the industry and could no longer maintain her extravagant lifestyle. Christopher, who had no involvement in Madison's business, could only watch silently as her company collapsed. Although he worked as a manager at a major corporation, the scandal left him increasingly demoralized and isolated at work. Catherine also faced repercussions from the chaos Madison had caused. At her workplace, the social media debacle became a hot topic, and she endured cold stares from her colleagues. Worse, the publicity surrounding the reception incident spread, leading to the end of her romantic relationship. Friends distanced themselves from her, and she eventually withdrew from social life entirely, isolating herself at home. Meanwhile, William and I were enjoying a peaceful newlywed life in our new home. We spent our days shopping together, watching movies, and savoring the little moments that brought us simple joy. The small house we had chosen together was always filled with warmth and comfort, and every day felt like a new discovery. As we spent more time together, our bond grew even stronger. Mom, who lived nearby, was a constant presence in our lives, watching over us with love and care. We often invited each other over for meals, and the time spent at the table with Mom and William was precious to me. Recently, Mr. Anderson started visiting us as well. The stories he shared about Dad were always fresh and fascinating, and I found myself looking forward to his visits. Mom and Mr. Anderson had also begun going out for meals together occasionally. Mr. Anderson, with his strong sense of responsibility, seemed to be a reassuring presence for Mom as well. Perhaps the two of them had been holding back their feelings out of consideration for me all this time. Thinking that made me feel a pang of guilt, but it also filled me with a deep desire to support their relationship. I was certain that Dad, watching from heaven, would wish for their happiness too. William, Mom, and Mr. Anderson. As I sat at the table, surrounded by the smiles of these precious people, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the happiness I now held.
I've asked Taylor to take care of the house, but I told her to call a helper if there's any trouble. I'm only giving her the bare minimum responsibilities. Well then, I'm off. My son Ryan said as he left for his 5-day business trip early in the morning, carrying his luggage. I watched his back as he walked away and started preparing breakfast. Cooking has been a struggle since my stroke, but thanks to researching simple recipes and easy housekeeping methods, I think I can manage somehow. Taylor, my son's wife, and I ate breakfast quietly together, and then I got ready to go to rehab. After a while, I heard the sound of her leaving the house, having finished getting ready before me. She's off to play already, huh? I knew this would happen. I thought to myself. She puts on a good face in front of Ryan, but the truth is she doesn't do any housework at all and just goes out to have fun. Amazed but not surprised, I headed to the rehabilitation facility. When I returned home after finishing my rehab, for some reason, the front door wouldn't open. I couldn't stand it any longer and rang the doorbell a few times. The door opened quietly, but for some reason, the chain lock was on as if to refuse entry.
Hey, Taylor, you're home, aren't you? Can't you let me in?
I asked, bewildered. Laughter could be heard from inside. You can barely do any housework, so you're just in the way if you're in the house. If you want to sleep, there's a sleeping bag Ryan used to use in the garage. Why don't you use that? She said mockingly and slammed the front door shut with force, kicking me out. I couldn't comprehend what was happening or why things had turned out this way. But then it occurred to me that this might be an opportunity in disguise. At that moment, I sorted out my feelings and made a decision.
All right. I won't go into the house. But don't complain about when or where I sleep,
I said to the firmly closed front door, not caring if she heard me or not, and slowly walked alone down the dark street. My name is Samantha. A 55-year-old housewife living with my son Ryan and his wife Taylor. Before getting married, I had a normal job working as an average office worker. While working at the company, there were encounters, but few romantic ones. On weekends and days off, I spent my time partying, introduced by a colleague who joined the company at the same time as me. That time, we gathered at a restaurant near the station, 4 women including myself, my colleague and her friends, and 4 men. One was running late due to work and was on his way. When my friend and I arrived at the restaurant, only 3 men were there. 5 minutes later, as we were talking and eating, a man in a suit arrived.
I'm Patrick. Sorry I'm late,
he said. Compared to the other men, his face was kind-looking rather than handsome, and he wasn't particularly tall. However, as I sat across from him and we talked, I learned about his hobbies and his considerate personality. The more we talked, the more interested I became in him. The other members seemed to be aiming for the most handsome man in the group. Normally, I would have set my sights on the same person as everyone else, but today I felt strange and couldn't take my eyes off him.
Does Samantha really want that guy? That average-looking, ordinary man?
The opinions were a bit negative, or something like that, perhaps because my choice was so unexpected. But no matter how many negative opinions were expressed, my feelings didn't change.
All right, if Samantha is that serious about it, we'll support her too.
As we were discussing what to do next after finishing the first round of drinks, I seized the opportunity when the other members were distracting the men and pulled Patrick away from the conversation to a slightly secluded spot. "I'm sorry, I think I'm a bit drunk. Could you come with me to the nearby restroom?" On cue, my colleagues urged the men to go ahead to the next bar, leaving Patrick and me alone.
Are you okay? If you're feeling sick, let's get you to the restroom quickly for now,"
Patrick said with concern in his voice.
"Actually, I'm not feeling sick or drunk at all. I'm sorry for deceiving you like this, but I really wanted to be alone with you,"
I confessed, feeling a twinge of guilt for my little white lie.
"So you're not feeling unwell? That's a relief. I was worried about what to do if you were really feeling sick. Anyway, I'm glad you're not feeling ill."
Even though I had tricked him into being alone with me, Patrick didn't scold me for lying. Instead, he was genuinely worried about my well-being. His kindness made me feel even more apologetic, but at the same time, my affection for him grew.
"I'm sorry, but if it's okay with you, would you like to start over and have a drink with just the two of us?"
I asked tentatively. For a moment, he looked taken aback by my invitation, but perhaps it was just his way of hiding his shyness. With an embarrassed expression, he accepted my offer. From there, we moved to a quieter setting like a bar, enjoying our time alone together. We talked about each other, sometimes listening to each other's work complaints, gradually closing the distance between our hearts. Feeling pleasantly tipsy, I stumbled, and Patrick caught me. In that moment, the way he looked at me was too much to resist. I pressed my lips to his, and we became one. A year later, despite our colleagues saying our relationship wouldn't last long, we brushed off their comments and finally got married. For a while after our wedding, we continued working as a dual-income couple. But when Ryan was born, Patrick expressed his wish for me to prioritize childcare and household duties. Taking his words to heart, I quit my job and devoted myself to supporting our family at home as a housewife. I hoped these happy times would last forever. However, that blissful period came crashing down with a loud noise one day. It was 3 years ago. After graduating from college, Ryan got a job at a local company. While working diligently as a full-fledged member of society, he married a woman named Taylor, and it had already been 2 years. Just when I thought even greater happiness was in store for our growing family, Patrick was involved in a traffic accident on his way to work and passed away. It happened right after we were talking about how he would likely live a long life, given his energetic nature. The incident was so sudden that, honestly, I couldn't believe it until I saw Patrick's deceased body. Apparently, I kept mumbling to Ryan that he must have just been injured. I don't even remember that myself, but they say the moment I saw him at the hospital, I let out a loud cry and broke down in tears. For a while, I couldn't recover from his death and spent my days in a daze. But as I looked at his portrait, smiling at the camera, I thought I saw a momentary flicker of sadness on his face.
"You're right, absolutely right. If I keep crying forever, you won't be able to rest peacefully in heaven, will you? I understand. I'll live strongly for the both of us,"
I declared, feeling like he had passed the baton of vitality back to me once more. Fortunately, thanks to the money he had been saving at the bank for our retirement and the insurance he had taken out in case of emergencies, we had enough savings to live comfortably as long as we didn't indulge in luxuries. Moreover, Ryan, worried about me, suggested that the three of us, him, Taylor, and myself, live together as a family. And now, here we are, living under one roof. Ryan worked from early morning until late at night, and Taylor often went out with her friends who lived nearby. The two of them were rarely home, leaving me to handle all the household chores single-handedly. However, the joy of being able to support my family outweighed the challenges, so it wasn't too difficult for me. In fact, I found happiness in being useful to my family. But there was also a concern gnawing at me. It was about Taylor. Like me, Taylor had been living with Ryan as a housewife until now. When I started living with them, I wondered how she would manage her life. To my surprise, she neither took on a part-time job nor helped with the housework. Instead, she spent her time freely hanging out with her friends in the neighborhood. Ryan probably knew that she was just playing around all the time, but for some reason, he never scolded her. On the contrary, he even gave her money. I found myself unable to comment on her behavior for quite some time. You see, during the family meeting for Ryan's wedding, I met Taylor's mom, Olivia, for the first time. We hit it off, bonding over the shared circumstance of having lost our husbands. Since then, we've become close friends. Because of this, I haven't been able to say anything to avoid causing unnecessary worry for her as well.
Using your mind is more exhausting than using your body, isn't it?
I thought to myself, feeling the mental strain of an inexplicable frustration and the pain of not being able to confide in anyone about my troubles. Then, one day, it happened out of the blue. As usual, I prepared breakfast for Ryan and Taylor and saw Ryan off first. "I'm going out with my friends again today, so please take care of the house. I'll be back in the evening," Taylor said before leaving shortly after Ryan had left for work. Watching Taylor's retreating figure, my day began. I cleaned the sink and its surroundings, and in between, I proceeded with the housework in the order I had predetermined, such as doing the laundry. After washing the family's bedding and vacuuming, I lifted 2 full garbage bags to take them outside. At that moment, my vision suddenly blurred and a strong dizziness overtook me. I lost my balance and collapsed on the spot with a dull thud. When I woke up, an unfamiliar ceiling stretched out before my eyes. My body felt heavy from the neck down, and I couldn't move properly. Somehow managing to move just my neck, I looked around and noticed an 4 connected to my arm and a machine measuring my heart rate. It seemed I was in a hospital. Perhaps someone had noticed something was wrong and called an ambulance for me. As I was trying to assess the situation with my freshly awakened mind, a nurse came in. Seeing that I had regained consciousness, she went to call the doctor. The doctor arrived, and I received an explanation of what had happened to my body and why I was in the hospital. "It's a stroke," he said. A stroke. The intense dizziness that caused me to lose consciousness was apparently one of the symptoms of a stroke, likely caused by my chronic high blood pressure. It turned out that a neighbor who had visited by chance called the ambulance for me. They heard a loud noise from inside the house, and since the door was unlocked, they entered to find me collapsed on the floor. The heaviness I had felt in my body since waking up was likely caused by the stroke. As time passed, sensation returned to my left side, but my right side still wouldn't move as I wanted it to. According to the doctor, when I collapsed, my brain suffered a strong impact, damaging the area responsible for controlling the right side of my body, leaving it paralyzed. However, with rehabilitation, I could apparently regain at least the minimal movement necessary for daily life, even if it wouldn't be the same as before. So, I decided to focus on rehab during my hospital stay. A month later, with blood, sweat, and tears, I continued my rehabilitation and somehow managed to walk slowly on my own. I would have to keep going to the hospital and rehab to treat the paralysis on my right side, but considering it was to avoid living an inconvenienced life in the future, it was no big deal. During my hospitalization, Ryan was busy with work and sent me a text apologizing, "I couldn't come to visit you," along with words of concern. The ones who came to pick me up when I was discharged were Ryan and Taylor, who hadn't visited me even once. "Thank you for coming to get me. Was work okay?" I asked Ryan. It's fine for a day or so. I took care of various things while I couldn't come to see you, he replied.
Samantha, are you all right?
Taylor chimed in from behind Ryan. For now, I decided not to think about her. While Ryan was loading the luggage I had used during my hospital stay into the car, she just watched, fiddling with her smartphone. I had recently started to wonder what my son saw in someone like her. Come on, let's go home, Mom. To make up for all the care you've given us until now, I'll be the one helping you out from now on, so don't worry. Ryan reassured me. Even though I was finally going home after being discharged, I couldn't help but feel a little anxious. However, Ryan's words cleared away that anxiety like a single ray of light piercing through my darkened heart. I'm sorry, Ryan, Taylor. I appreciate it. I expressed my heartfelt gratitude. Ryan responded with a smile, but out of the corner of my eye, I could see Taylor's expression looking somewhat displeased. And so, I finally returned home. Thanks to rehab, although I was still slightly lacking, I could do things for myself as long as I took my time. Therefore, I don't think I caused too much trouble for the two of them. The only times I needed their help were with difficult tasks for me now, like carrying heavy objects or reaching things in high places. Other than that, I tried to do as much as I could on my own. Dissatisfied with only moving during rehab, I did housework with the sole desire to return to a state as close to my former self as possible. Perhaps out of consideration for me, Ryan started coming home at 6 p.m. instead of working from early morning to late at night as he used to. He also began actively helping with household chores, saying he hadn't been able to help out until now. Mom, I just need to add the seasonings as written on the memo, right? He asked, referring to the memo I had written while cooking, unfamiliar with determining the flavors himself. Sometimes he mistook the types of seasonings and messed up. But he seemed to enjoy the challenge, thinking positively that failures are a part of trying new things. As for Taylor, although she stopped coming home late after hanging out as she used to, in line with Ryan's earlier return, she still went out to play when he inevitably had to work late. Ryan probably thought she was taking care of me, but I knew it would be troublesome if I told him the truth. It wasn't that I was being considerate, but given the current situation, I wanted to avoid troublesome things as much as possible. One night, while somehow managing to do the housework as usual with his help, he told me something. Due to work circumstances, he had no choice but to go on a 5-day business trip. During the trip, he said, "I'll leave the house to Taylor for now." However, he didn't know that she gleefully went out to play every time he was away from home for work or other reasons. Taylor probably put on a good face in front of Ryan, but after he left for the business trip, she would likely not do anything around the house as before. Instead, she might spend even more time going out to play and possibly not come home at all. More than worrying about myself, I was anxious about what might happen in the coming days. With that unease in my heart, time passed, and the day arrived when he was leaving for his trip. I've asked Taylor to take care of the house, but I told her to call a helper if there's any trouble. I'm only giving her the bare minimum responsibilities. Well then, I'm off, Ryan said as he left early in the morning with his luggage for the 5-day trip. Watching Ryan's back as he walked away, I started preparing breakfast for two, thinking Taylor would probably eat too. Cooking has been a struggle since my body became like this, but thanks to researching simple recipes and easy housekeeping methods to support my family, I think I can manage somehow. In my current condition, using a knife is dangerous, but I was amazed to discover that with the latest kitchen gadgets, I could cook without using a knife. At this rate, I might not even need Taylor's help. I'll try to do as much as I can on my own. Just as I made that resolution, Taylor woke up from the bedroom, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Oh, Ryan already left? she asked. Yes, he's gone. Let's do our best for these 5 days, Taylor. By the way, are you going to have breakfast? I replied. I'll eat, she said curtly. And so began our temporary 5-day life together, just the two of us. We ate breakfast quietly, and while I was getting ready to go to rehab, I heard the sound of Taylor leaving the house in a hurry, having finished getting ready before me.
She's off to play already, huh? I knew this would happen,
I thought to myself. I took a taxi to the rehabilitation facility, and after finishing my 2-hour rehab session, I went to a cafe adjacent to a nearby library to read and drink coffee. Before I knew it, it was evening by the time I started heading home. When I got home, for some reason, the door wouldn't open. I rang the doorbell a few times, but not understanding the situation, I couldn't stand it any longer and contacted Taylor. Then I heard footsteps from inside, and the house key turned quietly, but for some reason, the chain lock was on the door as if to refuse entry. Hey, Taylor? You're home, aren't you? Can't you let me in? I asked, bewildered, calling out to Taylor, who was probably on the other side of the door. Laughter could be heard from inside. Oh my, Samantha, what's the matter? Did you hit your head when you got injured and mistake where you're supposed to return to? Taylor asked mockingly, making me feel a momentary terror. What on earth was this person saying? At that time, I couldn't understand the true meaning behind her words. I'm not mistaken. Come on, let me in quickly. What on earth are you trying to do? I demanded. You can barely do any housework, so you're just in the way if you're in the house. If you want to sleep, there's a sleeping bag Ryan used to use in the garage. Why don't you use that? She said with a mocking face, then slammed the front door shut with force, kicking me out. I couldn't comprehend what was happening or why things had turned out this way. But then it occurred to me that this might be an opportunity in disguise. She had never done any housework and just played around until now, spending time as if she had been home when Ryan came back from work. I had endured it until now to avoid causing unnecessary worry for my good friend Olivia, but honestly, I had reached my limit. At that moment, I sorted out my feelings and made a decision. All right. I won't go into the house. But don't complain about when or where I sleep, I said to the firmly closed front door, not caring if she heard me or not, and slowly walked alone down the road at dusk, the sun having completely set. I realized now that I had left my phone and everything else except my wallet at home, thinking my only plan for the day was rehab. With this, I had no way to contact Ryan. Since I couldn't get in touch with him, I stopped a taxi that happened to be passing by and asked to be taken to a certain place. After a 20-minute drive, the place I was heading to was Olivia's house, where I had greeted her and visited a few times before. I thought it might be a bother to go at this hour, but with nowhere else to go and believing she was the only one who would directly understand my current situation, I came prepared for the rudeness and inconvenience. Huh? Samantha, what's wrong? Why are you here so late at night? Oh, by the way, is your injury okay? Could you please let me inside the house for now? I'll explain the situation properly later, Olivia asked, surprised by my sudden visit but warmly welcoming me and inviting me into her house. I loved the atmosphere of this home, which retained an old-fashioned charm and felt somehow nostalgic and comfortable. No, that didn't matter now. With her help, I was somehow led to the living room, and despite the late hour, she even served me coffee and entertained me. She seemed to have contacted Taylor after seeing me, but apparently, Taylor's phone was turned off and she couldn't reach her. So, what on earth happened? I can't get in touch with Taylor either, and seeing you here at this hour without any luggage, Did something happen at home? Olivia asked. I confided in her all the anxieties I had been holding in my heart until now. How Taylor, since getting married, didn't help with the house at all, how she was always going out to play while Ryan was at work, and how her behavior hadn't changed at all even after I became like this. And how I was driven out of the house by that very Taylor. I laid bare to her everything I had endured, saying, keeping it pushed down inside me. She seemed to have had no idea that her daughter was living like that at her husband's parents' home. From visiting a few times, I realized that she was a worrier when it came to Taylor. She had asked me several times before if she was doing okay at home, but each time I had brushed it off. However, with this incident, I decided to confide in her, thinking that if I kept minding her tendency to worry, my own well-being would be in danger. Olivia seemed shocked, unsure if what I had told her was true, unable to process it in her mind. While she collected her thoughts, I decided to borrow her phone and call Ryan to explain the situation. Although it was already late at night and I thought it might interfere with his work, I felt I had to tell him today, so I called Ryan with a glimmer of hope. Hello, he answered.
Ryan? Is now a good time?
Actually, I recounted the day's events to Ryan in order. What? No way, Taylor did that? And she never did anything around the house until now? She always boasted about working hard, but it was all a lie? It seemed he had only been aware of her usual behavior through her own words and had completely believed her convenient lies. I could sense his agitation even over the phone. After a few seconds of silence, as if sorting out the information in his mind, he said he would leave his work to a colleague for now and, after getting approval from the other party due to the emergency, he would come back in the morning. Hanging up the phone and heading to the living room where Olivia was waiting, I found her sitting with a stern expression, unlike before. Samantha, I want to talk to Taylor directly. I want to hear the truth from her mouth. She said.
You're right. I understand. It seems Ryan will also be coming back temporarily from his business trip tomorrow morning, so let's go to her together.
I replied. And so it was decided that Olivia would join the discussion with Ryan tomorrow. Apologizing for the inconvenience at such a late hour, I was about to borrow Olivia's phone to call a taxi to take me to a hotel for the night. However, Olivia suggested I stay at her house, saying it would be a waste of money. I told her I couldn't possibly impose on her for a place to sleep after already causing her trouble, but with Olivia's insistence that we were going together anyway, I ended up staying for just one night. The next morning, Olivia drove us to the station to pick up Ryan, and the three of us went to our home to talk to Taylor. Since I had left my keys inside the house, Ryan used his key to unlock the front door, and we returned home for the first time in several hours. Upon entering, we noticed a pair of men's sneakers among Taylor's and our shoes. Thinking it couldn't be, we saw the living room door slightly ajar and burst in, the three of us. There, on the living room sofa, we saw Taylor snuggled up with an unknown man. What the? Unable to contain his anger at the man sleeping nonchalantly even in this situation, Ryan shook him awake and dragged him off the sofa. Pulled down and slammed face first onto the floor, the man finally woke up, confused about what was happening. He looked around and seemed to notice our presence. Huh? Who are you? He asked. I'm the husband of the woman you were sleeping with, Ryan replied. We had the two of them get dressed and demanded an explanation from them about this situation. Taylor remained silent, perhaps irritated by this sudden situation. Instead, her lover began to explain how they had ended up like this. They had met on a dating app a few months ago, and their affair began in a drunken moment when they were out drinking together. From there, they started dating, leading to their current relationship. He himself had no idea Taylor was married. She had apparently taken off her ring and told him she was single, with no boyfriend or husband. As her lover revealed the truth, Taylor, who had maintained her silence, gradually clouded over, and beads of sweat formed on her forehead. "Why did you tattle on me? Everything was going well until now, but you've ruined it all, haven't you?" Taylor shouted furiously. Olivia, her mother, slapped her cheek while shedding large tears. "So it was all a lie that you were too busy with housework to even work part-time. I heard from Samantha yesterday. Even when Samantha was having a hard time, you were just out playing, and you used the money I gave you because you couldn't earn it yourself to play around with your lover." Hearing Olivia's words, Taylor's sharp gaze turned to me again. Even though it was her own responsibility, she glared at me with malicious eyes, as if to say it was clearly my fault. But Ryan stepped in between our gazes and glared back at Taylor. "Taylor, I can't go on with you anymore. I've been working desperately from morning till night to make money for our family, and this is how you use that money? You've got to be kidding me. I want a divorce." Unable to contain his anger at her betrayal, he brought up divorce in a heavy, low voice. Shaken by the word divorce, Taylor clung to Ryan's feet and screamed desperately, "Don't abandon me!" But of course, not even we, let alone Ryan, were willing to forgive her. No matter how much she cried or apologized, her fate was sealed in Ryan's and our minds. She had to atone for what she had done. At this point, for some reason, Taylor started to argue back. "But where's the proof that I was really having an affair? You're talking as if I've been cheating all along, but there's no such evidence anywhere, is there?" Her excuses were so pathetic that I could only be amazed. Ryan, who had been regaining his composure, seemed even angrier at her excuses. I delivered the final blow to Taylor. "I have proof. Recently, someone at the rehab facility I've been going to recommended that I secretly install indoor security cameras. Today's cameras are convenient because you can check the footage on your smartphone." Saying that, I opened the dedicated app on my phone, which I had left untouched, to check the security camera footage and showed her the recordings from last night until now. It showed Taylor on the phone with someone after she had kicked me out, and then her lover coming to the house, embracing passionately, and kissing repeatedly. Other footage also contained several statements and behaviors that confirmed Taylor's infidelity. She had complained that my injury made it difficult for her to find time to meet her lover. She had planned to kick me out so she could invite him over during Ryan's business trip. The evidence, including audio, was rock solid. "You can't talk your way out of this one. You said there was no evidence of cheating, but your claim has ended up being meaningless," Ryan said. "Yeah, so what if I cheated? What's wrong with that? You're never home because of work, and being cooped up in the house with Samantha all the time is suffocating." "I haven't done anything wrong," she admitted, brazenly confirming her infidelity up until now. Apparently, she had spent all the money she had received from Ryan and Olivia on buying things for her lover and going out to eat with him. Not wanting to even breathe the same air as Taylor, who had fully admitted to cheating, we quickly kicked her and her lover out. "We'll talk more about this later," Ryan stressed. She didn't respond to his words as she left, but later, she came with her lover who had been in the house, and discussions were held with a lawyer present. The footage from the security cameras I had installed was established as evidence to validate the divorce, and Ryan and Taylor's divorce was granted. Furthermore, compensation and settlement money were demanded from Taylor and her lover, who had been cheating, in the divorce trial. But Taylor showed no signs of remorse, not just for this incident, but for the countless troubles she had caused in the past. Fed up with her antics, Ryan and Olivia decided to cut all ties with her completely. Don't you dare come near us ever again. Despite being abandoned by Ryan, who had loved her passionately, and Olivia, her own mother, Taylor seemed utterly unfazed. If anything, she appeared almost relieved as she sat through the discussions with the lawyers and us, a serene expression on her face. Now single, Taylor soon discovered that her lover had never harbored any romantic feelings for her. To him, she was nothing more than a convenient plaything. As soon as he had paid off his share of the settlement, he vanished from her life without a trace. Accustomed to a life of pampering and indulgence, Taylor found herself woefully unprepared for the harsh realities of fending for herself. The meager sum she had left was hardly enough to maintain a decent standard of living, forcing her to settle for a dilapidated apartment. On top of that, she was saddled with the burden of paying the court-ordered alimony from the divorce, which meant she had to work herself to the bone from dawn till dusk just to stay afloat. Ryan, on the other hand, found himself with a bit more financial wiggle room after the divorce. Freed from the shackles of his previous workaholic lifestyle, he now made a point of coming home early in the evenings to help out with the household chores. His dedication and support allowed me to focus more intently on my rehabilitation. My friendship with Olivia remained as strong as ever. Even though she had cut ties with her daughter, Taylor, she made it clear that her bond with me was a separate matter entirely. She chose to believe in me over her own flesh and blood, and for that, I will be forever grateful. With Ryan's unwavering commitment to keeping our home running smoothly and her constant companionship during my therapy sessions, I found myself regaining more mobility and independence than ever before. These days, my greatest joy comes from the simple pleasures of grabbing a coffee or indulging in a bit of retail therapy with my best friend, Olivia, after a long day of rehabilitation. Life is good, and I couldn't be happier. Since Greg passed away, you'll be moving back with your parents, right? We'll be taking over this house. My beloved husband, Greg, had suddenly passed away. Right after the funeral, as I was grieving, Greg's parents, Reynold and Melissa, came to visit me. Although not many, this house is filled with memories of living with him. Why do I have to be the one to leave? However, to me, who was in no state to handle this, my Melissa ruthlessly declared those words. My name is Kathleen. I work as a clerk at a real estate agency. My encounter with Greg, who would become my precious husband, was through the real estate agency where I work. He was the real brother of my colleague, Bro, and the two were extremely close. Since their workplaces were nearby, Bro often stopped by. As I also worked as a clerk, I became close with my colleague who would later become my husband. That's how I was introduced to his real brother. Eventually, I started spending more time with the brothers, such as going out for lunch together when they invited me. I thought he was a nice guy who was easy to talk to and had a bright personality, but I didn't really think of him as a potential romantic partner. I assumed he felt the same way, but then one day, something happened that triggered a change in our relationship. Bro had made a reservation at a restaurant for us to meet up, but he suddenly had an urgent matter and couldn't make it. However, it seemed like a waste to cancel the reservation. So, for the first time, Greg and I had the opportunity to be alone together. I found out later that the Bro brothers had planned this together, and David had arranged for us to be alone at Bro's request. The food was delicious, and our conversation flowed easily. We quickly became intimate, sharing our upbringings and values. The more I got to know his inner self, the more I was drawn to his warm smile. From that day on, our relationship changed. And it didn't take long for us to get married. It probably wouldn't have happened without David's thoughtfulness. In that sense, I couldn't be more grateful to him for the events that were about to unfold. And then the day came to meet my PIL. Despite my anxiety, they welcomed me very warmly. The conversation continued with compassion, and my nervousness melted away. "We're so happy you're here. We've been looking forward to meeting you, Kathleen. I've cooked up a storm hoping today would be a wonderful day," Melissa said, fussing over me. My PIL, like their eldest son Greg, were very independent and approachable people. I was relieved and filled with gratitude for the enjoyable time I had spent at my in-laws' home. Even after several interactions, my in-laws continued to support our happiness while maintaining a comfortable distance, never pressuring us about marriage or children. Eventually, the topic of living together with my in-laws came up, but we had plans to build our own home. "Actually, my grandfather left me a house," I explained, and my in-laws listened intently and nodded. To my grandfather, I was his only granddaughter, and he doted on me immensely. He even left me a magnificent house with land, perfectly renovated down to the interior. It was as if my grandfather had waited for the inheritance process to be completed before passing away. The land was set to undergo redevelopment soon, and due to its prime location, the property value had skyrocketed. However, with my long experience in the real estate industry, I understood that boldly selling the property would be more beneficial for our dream home plans than living there ourselves. I was grateful for my grandfather's love, but he had told us that we could either live in or sell the inherited house, so we were already considering selling it. After getting married, we moved into that house. However, even with its excellent location, it was difficult to continue living there due to the distance from our workplaces. As we were moving forward with the plan to sell the house, one day, a significant change came to our lives. Craig, who worked in sales, was ordered to transfer. His company was a large corporation with branches all across the United States. Even though we were newlyweds, he was told that he was the only suitable candidate, and since it was an official order, he couldn't refuse. "I'll make sure to come back every holiday. Also, my parents said they'll come visit. I don't want you to overdo it, but could you take them out and show them around? Reynold and Melissa are really nice people, so going out with them won't be a problem. But it looks like it'll be a while before we can let go of the house." Considering my job as well, it was decided that he would go on a solo assignment. It was sudden, but I had to suppress my loneliness and worries and wait for the day we could live together again. Just as Greg had said, during the holidays, my in-laws, especially Melissa, frequently came to visit. She shared that she too had endured loneliness many times in the past when Reynold had to go on business trips, while she took care of their young children. "Even without children, you can nurture family memories. Let's go out together. Going shopping will lift your spirits. Come on, Kathleen." Thanks to her, I didn't feel lonely and instead had busy holidays. However, little by little, things started to bother me. On my days off from work, Melissa would almost always invite me to go out. That was fine, but after a month, her invitations became somewhat forceful, and she seemed to disregard my fatigue and housework. If I said, "I want to rest this week," she would furrow her brows as if I were being selfish. "But going out together is fun, isn't it? Or are you saying you don't like going out with me?" "That's not it. But since you take me out every week, don't you need some rest too?" Melissa looked sad. Even when I hurriedly tried to clear up the misunderstanding, she wouldn't listen at all. Although I was perplexed, when I agreed, she showed a smile and acted as if she had forgotten how she had persistently pressured me. My doubts about her words and actions gradually grew stronger. The places she forcibly invited me to were all shops where high expenses piled up. Shopping at brand stores and expensive meals continued, and she manipulated the situation so that I would bear the costs. She would often leave the store first, leaving me behind with no choice but to pay. There was never any gratitude for the payments, nor did she ever pay me back later. Certainly, I had savings since I owned a home and received a sufficient salary. However, my husband and I had always been mindful of restraint, so I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable with Melissa's extravagant behavior. Sometimes both of my in-laws would be there, but it was the same in those cases too. Rather, with my FIL Reynolds joining in, my burden only became heavier. I knew I needed to resolve this, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to Greg about it. He had said, "I'll definitely come back during the holidays." But the sales office where he was assigned was quite busy, and he couldn't come back easily. "Mom told me you've been going out every week. Are you managing okay? You don't seem worried?" That's right. When I saw Greg's face on our video call, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and his slightly sunken cheeks. I could tell he was still tired from work. Feeling guilty about bringing up the issue with Melissa, I found myself putting on a brave face. "Melissa has been really good to me. Greg, please take care of yourself too. I'm fine. So, don't worry." While making excuses to Greg, I couldn't refuse to pay for the outings with my in-laws. However, their attitude gradually escalated, and finally, when I insisted, "I can't go out today," they said something like this. Then, "Hey, can't you lend me some money?" "What? You want me to pay?" "Just a little bit, really just a small amount. I already made a reservation at the restaurant. I'll take some other friends instead, so can you cover the amount I don't have on me?" I wanted to refuse, but if I did, the situation would become complicated and unmanageable. Resigned to the fact that I had no choice but to pay, I opened my wallet. However, I never showed this kind of attitude in front of Greg. When I subtly probed Melissa, saying, "Why don't you try asking Greg?" I was surprised when she replied, "Asking him would be shameful." She thought it was embarrassing to ask her eldest son, so she figured she could just ask his wife instead. I had long given up on her, and it had become a daily occurrence for her to demand money from me. At the very least, if I gave her money under the guise of an allowance, Melissa would stop forcibly dragging me out. I knew it had developed into a big problem. However, I was exhausted from the inability to have a proper dialogue with her. Her behavior became increasingly incomprehensible and bizarre. Just when I thought she had suddenly shown up without prior notice, she would look around the inside and outside of the house as if licking it, making me feel like my home's privacy was being violated. "I wonder if these furnishings are what Kathleen's grandpa left behind. It's amazing that you have the means to have such high-end items." Some of the furniture included antiques that my grandfather had been fond of. She seemed to like them, barging in to admire them and enjoying them as if they were her own. This is my and Greg's home. I finally started considering confiding in Greg about Melissa's words and actions. Greg might be surprised, but how great would it be if we could think together about how to deal with her? Her behavior was never pleasant. No matter how much of an in-law relationship we had, it was an act of invading privacy. However, at the same time, the duration of Greg's solo assignment was determined. If I could just endure a little longer, he would come back, and if Greg were here, my in-laws would stop demanding money too. A little hope sprouted in my heart. Greg was working hard every day, so my patience would only be a little longer. That's how I was eagerly awaiting my reunion with Greg, but the situation took an unexpected turn. "What? Greg collapsed and is in the hospital?" My mind went blank. The person who contacted me was a colleague from his assignment location, and I hurriedly headed to the hospital. Perhaps due to the heavy workload, he had suddenly suffered a heart attack. He was transported by ambulance, but it was too late. Kind Greg, whose strong point was his health, passed away in an instant from an attack that no one could have anticipated. I faced the funeral without even being able to accept reality. I don't remember much due to the strong sense of loss. David rushed over and took care of most of the miscellaneous matters for me. I'm sorry. You just lost bro too, and you're helping me so much. It's only natural for me to help with bro's funeral. More importantly, is everything okay with the land? Are the preparations for the house complete? Around the end of the funeral, David and I talked extensively while cleaning up. I nodded to that and answered, "Perfect." And a few days after Greg's funeral, my PAL came to visit the house together. However, it was glaringly obvious that they hadn't come to console me. Although it was sudden and unfortunate about our son, you'll be fine because we're here. Don't worry. For some reason, her face was smiling in an eerie way. Even more astonishingly, she had arranged for a truck, and it was packed full of luggage like furniture from my in-laws' home. I was so surprised and confused that I couldn't even speak. No matter how you looked at it, this was a move-in. Melissa and the others were trying to move in without any consultation. What was making them do this? But the answer was clear. Could it be that you're after our land? I put into words the concern that had been in my heart all along, even as I was confused. She showed a cold smile. The property value has skyrocketed quite a bit. I've had my eye on this house for a long time. I mean, the only reason you were able to marry my son was because of this inheritance, right? I allowed the marriage because you were the one who inherited it. Filled with despair, I lost my words. You mean you and Melissa are going to live with me? What? What kind of stupid thing are you saying? When I asked that while still confused, she raised her eyebrows. Greg's death was an unexpected event, but actually, even if it hadn't been, Melissa had planned to get her hands on this house. My in-laws were trying to kick me out and take over this property. And they seemed to have assumed on their own that I would leave this house. Since our son died too, you'll be going back to your parents' place, right? This house will be sad if it's empty, so we'll live in it for you. That's why I'm telling you not to worry. Her face changed into a distorted, eerie smile. Even as I felt fear, I pointed out her mistake. But this house has already been sold. I held back from laughing at Melissa's misunderstanding, but I couldn't hide my half-smiling expression. In contrast, Melissa froze, saying, "What?" Just then, a moving company truck from a completely different company arrived. "Excuse me, I'm here for a delivery to your home." Perhaps because a truck from a competing company was parked there, a burly mover got out and called out to us to confirm. The movers she had arranged also got out. They probably realized something was off since they couldn't start working and a different truck had arrived. They sought an explanation from my in-laws, but the two of them were flustered and incoherent. There was no point in all of us arguing like this. Seeing my flustered in-laws, I finally began to regain my composure. After that, I gave precise instructions to have the trucks moved. This house already has a buyer, and the contract has been finalized. A new family is moving in, so we can't bring these people's belongings into someone else's home, right? As the movers were also shocked, a luxury car arrived just then. A wealthy-looking couple and their children got out. In fact, this property was no longer mine. They were the new owners. My in-laws became even more confused, seemingly unable to understand what was happening. "Please move the trucks quickly. The new residents can't start their work." Somehow, I managed to get the trucks on Melissa's side to leave, and the movers immediately got to work, carrying brand new furniture in the planned order. Melissa and the others couldn't accept it and started persistently pestering me at the front door. The husband, who was the buyer, had his family take refuge in the car and rushed over here, demanding an explanation, starting yet another commotion. "Who are you people?" "My family bought this place." "Have the trucks leave quickly too." I never thought my in-laws would come, so I apologized profusely and somehow got them to calm down. But Melissa and the others wouldn't leave. They actually pushed past us and charged into the house. However, naturally, the inside of the house had also completely changed from what the two of them knew. None of the furniture my husband and I had used remained. Melissa was shocked by the sight and started making a scene, going crazy. "What is this? The house is empty. That antique furniture and lighting, they were my favorites. What's going on?" She was outraged, unable to understand what was happening. When the residents finally shouted, "We're calling the police!" Reynolds, who had been in a panic, ran as if jolted and dragged Melissa away to retreat. Once they were a little away from the scene, even the heated-up Melissa became somewhat dazed and quiet. For the time being, I prioritized apologizing to the residents. They said there was no guarantee that problems wouldn't arise in the future, and by taking down my in-laws' names and addresses, I was somehow released. Although I was feeling intense fatigue, I still had to explain to my in-laws. I returned to the two of them and calmly informed them that the move had been completed a few days before Greg's passing. "This house was originally planned to be sold along with the land, so it's according to the initial plan." Greg's solo assignment had put a stop to it once, but there was a certain background to why things could progress so smoothly. The one who supported our decision was David. I was perplexed by the change in my in-laws, who had even started asking for money, but I couldn't confide in Greg because I didn't want him to worry, so I continued to spend my days feeling down. David was the one who noticed and saved me. He said he didn't get along well with my in-laws' home and offered to help if I had any troubles. Not wanting to ruin my relationship with my husband or my in-laws, I trusted David, who promised not to tell anyone, and decided to consult him about everything. Upon hearing my story, he became furious with my in-laws. As Greg's younger brother and my colleague, he understood my in-laws' schemes well. And for David, his bro Greg was his only family. He said that I, as Greg's wife, was like family too. "I think our parents will eventually try to live together in that house or conveniently kick you two out and make it their own." According to David, both of my in-laws had high-class thinking to the point of being ignorant of the world. They were pretentious and didn't hesitate to use any means necessary. Especially Melissa, who was terribly selfish. While she pretended to be a lovely lady when she was keeping up appearances, she was actually a nasty person who only thought about her own convenience. Because they were blood-related family, the episodes about my in-laws that David shared were all intense. Since they put on a front in front of their eldest son, who was the successor, Greg probably never had to see this side of his parents. Anyway, when it was suggested that I should sell the land early to avoid having it taken by my in-laws, I agreed with David's opinion and decided to proceed with the sale. No matter how precious it was, having been left by my dear grandfather, I wanted to avoid this house becoming an obstacle for my husband and me. Rather, it was because it was precious that I didn't want to leave any roots of trouble. Of course, I didn't decide on my own. I discussed it with Greg while he was still alive and got his consent. At that time, he learned about all of his parents' actions. I really didn't want to tell him, but I couldn't complete the sale all by myself. However, he properly understood my feelings of not being able to consult him, and on top of that, he declared that he couldn't forgive his parents' actions. "I'm sorry I didn't notice. If it's okay with you, Kathleen, let's complete the sale before my parents make a move." "I'm sorry, even though it's the precious house you inherited from Grandpa. No, he would agree that we should let it go if it's going to cause trouble. I decided to sell the land to protect my future with Greg, not my relationship with my in-laws. Regarding the sale, David, who was a real estate expert, did his best to find the most suitable buyer. What I had to do was find a new place to move to as soon as possible and act naturally so my in-laws wouldn't notice. Since we had been living in the house, it had some signs of use but was as good as new, and we kept the price down accordingly. Then, we were able to find a buyer right away, and the sale went smoothly. That was the family that arrived earlier. I had actually planned to wait for his return in our new home that we moved to. Greg was also happy about the sale, so that's the only thing I regret. The movers start bringing in the furniture. Disregarding my expelled in-laws, the moving work steadily progressed. My in-laws didn't make a fuss and just watched in a daze, but they couldn't stay like that forever. The moving company that my in-laws had hired came demanding an explanation, looking angry. From the company's perspective, there was an incomprehensible deficiency causing a booking issue with the move. They pressed my in-laws, saying, "I can't believe something like this happened. And this is a breach of contract." But my in-laws were vague and couldn't explain well. In the end, it was decided that the household goods would be taken back for the time being, but due to the unexpected situation, it seemed that a substantial surcharge would be billed. Perhaps finally understanding the series of events, Melissa clung to me, trembling. "Since this is the house of my son's wife, it's our house. Right? This is strange, isn't it?" She lined up desperate excuses, trying to somehow persuade me, but I ignored them and left with just my carry-on luggage. The land already belonged to the new family and wasn't even mine anymore, so there was nothing I needed to answer for. Things went smoothly even after Greg's funeral. I did come face to face with my in-laws, and they seemed to want to say something to me about the house, but in the end, they couldn't say it and hid before leaving. I no longer had any obligation to fulfill toward my in-laws either, so since I had no business with them, I hardly spoke to them at all. I spent my days peacefully without incident. In the new house. In the small house where my husband and I were supposed to restart, I faced the sadness of losing Greg. I had a large amount of savings from the sale, but now that Greg was gone, the plan to build our own home had vanished. As I returned to work, I immersed myself in the few memories I had with Greg and took a fresh look at myself to gradually become more positive. On the other hand, my in-laws, especially Melissa, must have had a frustrating sense of dissatisfaction building up. I didn't want to be involved with them anymore, so I didn't even let them know the location of my new residence. Unable to interact with me, that seemed to further increase Melissa's dissatisfaction. She had been putting on airs for her eldest son, and she couldn't go to David, with whom she had a bad relationship, at this point. However, the stress of not knowing my whereabouts kept piling up, and eventually, Melissa lost her balance. One late night, she committed the vicious act of spilling gasoline around the sold house. Fortunately, a passing neighbor found it suspicious and immediately restrained her, avoiding any incidents. When the police were notified, it was discovered that she had also prepared old papers and lighters, and she was arrested on suspicion of attempted arson. The husband, who had almost been set on fire, became furious when he realized the culprit was the woman who had barged in on moving day, and he contacted me too, saying he would definitely press charges. I apologized many times, but that was an apology for the terrifying experience of almost being set on fire, and there was nothing I could do about her attempted arson. In the end, Melissa, who was fixated on the house, couldn't avoid being charged. I also apologized repeatedly and somehow gained forgiveness, promising that such a thing would never happen again. She had grown up spoiled, not knowing poverty, and she could get anything she wanted. That's probably why she felt irritated when things didn't go her way, wanting that house, and a distorted jealousy sprouted within her. She grew to resent the house and land, turned to crime, and in the end, she ended up in prison. Reynolds, who was supposed to be her support, had endless fights with Melissa after her arrest, abandoned her, and forcibly finalized their divorce. So even after serving her sentence, her home to return to was completely lost. However, that could be said to be the result of the actions she chose. David was lonely after losing his bro, but he encouraged me, saying, "I can endure it because I have my Sael." My ties with my in-laws were safely cut, but I hadn't lost all my family. I decided in my heart to spend my days peacefully, for the sake of Greg, who was watching over me from heaven.
Mom, it's terrible. We have to run away now or we'll be killed. What? What happened?
When I asked for the reason, my daughter Kayla played me a recording from her smartphone.
My wife and daughter will be killed. No, I mean, they're gone, so I'll pay back the insurance money right away.
What came out of Kayla's smartphone was the voice of my husband, Daniel. Me and Kayla, gone? Could it be a prank by the two of them? No, wait, that's not it. Kayla looks too disturbed. This means Kayla accidentally heard Daniel starting to say he would take our lives. And he said he'd pay back right away, so he must be in debt. His irresponsible nature hasn't changed. I've known Daniel for over 20 years since we met in college. I've helped him out many times and always believed in him. But it was all just my one-sided affection. Otherwise, the thought of taking a life for money would never occur. I will never forgive such a man. My name is Melissa Williams. I'm a 42-year-old working housewife, employed at a travel agency. I met Daniel, who's the same age as me, during college in a camping club. That's why we still talk about this kind of stuff.
Let's go camping sometime soon.
What about work?
I work for a camping gear manufacturer. Going camping is part of my job.
Oh, right. What about you, Kayla? I smiled and looked back at Kayla. My high school daughter, Kayla, is recently obsessed with social media. Even now, she's fully engrossed in her smartphone. But Kayla is making an okay sign with her left hand. I got pregnant with Kayla when I was 25, which led to my marriage with Daniel. So, Kayla is a crucial part of our bond. The happiness we have now is all thanks to Kayla. I don't say it out loud, but I always think so. After all, Daniel and I started dating when we were college students. We hit it off in the same camping club, which led to our relationship. Daniel, as a boyfriend, was almost perfect. Being outdoorsy, he had a good physique and was reliable. His sense of fashion was also great. Most of all, I liked how kind he was to me and that he was a good listener. However, as a marriage partner, there was something that bothered me. That was his sense of money. Back then, Daniel often asked me this.
Melissa, could you come over and cook?
Could it be?
When I asked, Daniel put his hands together. Then he would plead. Sorry, I'm broke. I have nothing to eat until my part-time job paycheck comes in.
Figures.
Daniel being broke was a usual occurrence, so being asked like this was common. Please, just until I get my paycheck next week. Make meals until then. I guess I have no choice.
Is that okay?
To Daniel's question, I nodded slightly. In fact, Daniel has no parents. He lost them in a fire at his house when he was in middle school.
I wonder if Daniel doesn't get any money from home?
I've thought this more than once or twice. But it's private, so I couldn't easily ask. Afterward, I bought groceries at the supermarket and visited Daniel's room. I've been waiting, Melissa. Come on in. Guided by Daniel, I entered the room. Then, instantly, something caught my eye.
What's this?
This? Cool, right? I bought it, Daniel said proudly. At his feet, there were camping cooking equipment, a sleeping bag, and a tent still in its box, all scattered around. You bought all of this? I spent all of last month's part-time job earnings on it. You're kidding, right? You said you bought stuff last time too. In my surprise, I ended up speaking in a stern tone. Then Daniel suddenly looked angry. What, you have complaints? No complaints, but this is clearly a waste. This is why you're always broke, I told him straight. But Daniel coldly said, It's my money, I can spend it how I want. But camping is my hobby. Don't interfere with this, Daniel yelled at me. It's always like this with Daniel. He spends recklessly and then eventually says he has no money. Then, he asks for help from me and others. Sometimes he even borrows money from me or others. Will this continue forever? Because of these worries, I couldn't consider Daniel as a marriage partner. As time went on, we graduated from college. I landed a job at a travel agency, and Daniel got a job at a camping gear manufacturer. However, with graduation and employment as turning points, I was considering breaking up with Daniel. Continuing the relationship as it was, marriage seemed difficult. It would be better for both of us to clearly part ways. That's what I thought, but as soon as he started working, Daniel changed completely. He worked seriously and didn't waste money at all. He didn't go out drinking with colleagues, nor did he wander around. We have to save for marriage, right?
Are you really going to save? And not go into debt like before?
Of course not. I promise. I was moved by Daniel's words. He was different from the irresponsible Daniel of our student days. Maybe marrying him wouldn't be so bad. I continued dating Daniel. Eventually, at the age of 25, I got pregnant with Kayla. We finally became husband and wife. In the early days of our marriage, Daniel helped with child-rearing and household chores. So, I truly thought he was a good father. But that life didn't last long. Soon after giving birth, I returned to work. When we started leaving Kayla at a childcare center, Daniel's attitude changed significantly. Daniel, help me clean the room. No way. I have to go out. Can't you help a little? You hardly ever help with the chores anymore. I handed the vacuum cleaner to Daniel. But Daniel didn't take it. Instead, he turned away and said, Housework and child-rearing are the wife's job. You do it. What's that supposed to mean? You used to help. I couldn't help but yell. Then Daniel frowned and muttered, That was because Kayla was little. Now, it doesn't take that much effort, and you can manage on your own. That's not true. Enough. I have things to do now. With that, Daniel left on his own.
What's with him, really?
Most men push housework onto their wives. I understood that well. But being in that position myself made the words weigh differently.
At least he's still working. Maybe that's good enough.
I muttered as I started cleaning. I threw away the insurance flyers Daniel had been looking at into the trash. He even left someone's business card out. He's really messy. I didn't want to be blamed if Daniel lost that business card. So, I took a photo of the business card with my smartphone before placing it on the table. As I continued cleaning, I suddenly realized something odd.
Wait. Where's my jewelry?
My favorite piece of jewelry was missing. Did I leave it somewhere? No, I'm sure I put it in its case. I searched the room while cleaning, but it was nowhere to be found. Hours went by, and when Daniel came home in the evening, I asked him, "Daniel, have you seen my jewelry?"
I don't know.
You didn't sell it, did you? Daniel looked flustered when I asked, but he quickly denied it.
Of course not.
Yeah, right.
The possibility of Daniel having sold it existed, but there was no proof. Despite my suspicions, I couldn't press him any further. Despite such misunderstandings and small troubles, we were living happily. Over time, Kayla grew up and became a high school student. With less to worry about, I focused on my job. I was leading a fulfilling life. Then one day, Daniel, who had returned from work, asked me,
Melissa, are you insured?
"I am insured, yes."
Good then.
I felt uneasy about Daniel's odd behavior. When I sat in front of Daniel, he handed me a pamphlet. He started talking fluently as he showed it to me.
A housing complex is being built in the next town.
A housing complex?
A place with built houses for sale. Houses all lined up and…
Daniel showed me photos on his smartphone. I see, I thought, then Daniel said something unexpected.
I actually want to buy a new house there. That's why I asked about the insurance.
When buying a house and taking out a loan, it's common to join a group credit life insurance. That's all he was asking about, Daniel said.
Buying a house? Are you sure it's okay? Of course. It might trouble you, but it's no trouble at all. I'll work hard too, so let's buy one.
I thought owning a home was a dream far beyond reach. But it was becoming a reality. I was overjoyed, feeling like I was on top of the world. After some time, on a particular Sunday, we, as a family of 3, headed to sign the contract. It was about a 30-minute drive from our current condominium. Upon arrival, among the lined-up built homes, there was a prefab office. "Nice to meet you, I'm Jason Garcia, your agent." Perhaps because Daniel had talked to him beforehand, the home builder agent, Jason, quickly appeared. We were shown around the model house under Jason's guidance. While we were each looking around the house, Kayla came running from somewhere.
Mom, come here.
Kayla forcefully took me to the prefab office. Once inside, Kayla closed the door. "What's wrong, Kayla?"
Mom, it's terrible. We have to run away now or we'll be killed. What? What happened?
When I asked for the reason, Kayla played me a recording from her smartphone.
My wife and daughter will be killed. No, I mean, they're gone, so I'll pay back the insurance money right away. It's okay, I'll pay it right away.
The voice coming from Kayla's smartphone was Daniel's. Moreover, he sounded terribly panicked. Me and Kayla, gone? Before that, he almost said kill. Could it be a prank by the two of them? No, wait, that's not it. Kayla looks too disturbed. This means Kayla accidentally heard Daniel starting to say he would take our lives. And he said he'd pay back right away, so he must be in debt. His irresponsible nature hasn't changed. I've known Daniel for over 20 years since we met in college. I've helped him out many times and always believed in him. I thought we had been supporting each other since we got married. But it was all just my one-sided affection. Otherwise, the thought of taking a life for money would never occur. That man. I'll never forgive him. Confused still, I asked Kayla.
Kayla, how did you get this?
Dad was talking on the phone outside, so we wouldn't hear, said Kayla, with a pale face, trembling. I hugged Kayla.
Dad almost said kill. That means to kill, right?
It's okay, Kayla. I'll take care of it. Right then, the entrance door suddenly opened. Kayla and I were startled.
Sorry. I was in a hurry.
It was Jason who entered. Peering outside, Jason locked the office door. Then he whispered to us.
Escape now without Daniel finding you. He was talking about something terrible.
Something terrible?
Yes, about you too.
The agent struggled to find words. It seemed he heard the same thing as Kayla. Well, my daughter heard that conversation too. When I mentioned this, Jason looked shocked.
Then, it's clear. Daniel is being held back by my colleague, so leave through the back now.
Okay. I really want to confront Daniel now. But Kayla is too frightened. I can't leave Kayla alone and go to Daniel. Let's go to my parents' house for now. Exiting through the back, Kayla and I jumped into a taxi. We headed to my parents' house. Arriving at my parents' house in about an hour, I briefly explained the situation and left Kayla with them. Then I headed to a nearby law firm. On the way, my smartphone rang. It was Daniel. I hesitated but answered the phone.
Hello?
Melissa? Where are you? I was worried, you suddenly disappeared. Is Kayla with you?
Yes. Kayla is with me, so don't worry.
Hearing this, I could hear Daniel sigh. I was worried. What happened all of a sudden?
Actually,
I lied that my father, Brian, had collapsed. I thought that would serve as an excuse for suddenly disappearing. Daniel seemed to believe that. But he continued. So, when are you coming back? I have things to plan over here. It sounded like he had plans to take our lives. Sorry, it might take a while.
What do you mean by that? Are you going to leave me hanging?
Daniel suddenly yelled, clearly irritated. That confirmed my suspicions that his words were serious.
sorry, but I don't plan to come back.
What?
You don't help with housework, and you raise your voice when you get angry like earlier. I hate that. I stated plainly. Daniel lost his words for a moment. But he quickly retorted. I shouldn't have yelled. It was bad timing when Brian collapsed and you were feeling insecure. It's too late to apologize now. Let's take this chance to put some distance between us. Bringing up divorce might make him suspicious, so I reluctantly said that. Then Daniel became visibly upset.
You're hiding something, aren't you? We were just talking about buying a house.
Yes, but
It's an affair, isn't it? You got a call from your lover and suddenly want a divorce from me.
Daniel's roar echoed. Being accused of such awful things, I completely shrank back. After Daniel vented his complaints, I quietly announced, That's another thing I hate. I'll consider divorce and consult a lawyer.
Wait a minute. What about buying a house? I don't care. Don't contact me for a while.
I ended the call unilaterally. Immediately, I started to tremble. This was the first time I felt fear towards Daniel. Even in arguments, I had never felt this much fear.
This won't do. I have to leave.
I resolved to get a divorce. Afterwards, I informed my company I would be taking some time off. Then I consulted a lawyer about the divorce. I also decided to submit the recording to the police and have them investigate Daniel's debts. While discussing, I remembered something.
Speaking of which, that business card.
A business card I found while cleaning a little while ago. Thinking back, the company name was Finance. Clearly a financial-related business card, but not a well-known consumer finance company.
Could it be a malicious lender?
Feeling uneasy, I showed it to the lawyer. Sure enough, it was suspected to be from a malicious lender. In essence, here's the situation. Daniel borrowed money from some malicious lender. Unable to repay, he was pressed for payment. That's why he aimed for our insurance money. After having the lawyer delve deeper, it became clear that Daniel had debts from various sources. Not just consumer finance companies, but also colleagues and malicious lenders. The cause was gambling. Unbeknownst to me, Daniel had apparently been addicted to gambling since our college days. All I could do was sigh. However, I couldn't just leave things as they were. I have to divorce him before it affects Kayla. I resolved to tell him it's over. It's been a week since I fled from Daniel. He hasn't contacted me, but I never know when he might show up.
I need to find out what Daniel is up to.
I called Daniel's company, but not to speak to Daniel. I had asked for Kent Martinez, a male colleague of Daniel's. Kent Martinez speaking, who is this? Kent asked with a puzzled voice. I decided to introduce myself boldly.
I'm Melissa, Daniel Williams's wife.
Oh, Daniel's wife. Yes, Daniel is here, I'll transfer you.
Please wait. Don't transfer me to Daniel.
I blurted out loudly. Kent fell silent for a moment. Then he hesitantly said, Is there something wrong? I explained the situation to Kent. I was confident Kent would believe me. Because Kent too had lent a large sum of money to Daniel. Moreover, Daniel hadn't paid him back, or so he had told his subordinate. I had heard about it from the lawyer. And that's the situation.
Really? Daniel did something that serious?
Kent sounded incredulous. But I confirmed it was true. Then, I made a request of Kent.
Could you please keep an eye on Daniel for me?
Me? Watch Daniel?
Yes, just contact me if anything happens. I pleaded earnestly. Kent seemed hesitant at first, but, influenced by my earnestness, agreed to my request in the end. All right, I'll do it. I thanked him once more before ending the call.
Now I have to be clear with Daniel.
My anxiety grew. What if Daniel became enraged? How could I protect Kayla if Daniel attempted to harm us? These thoughts raced through my mind. Yet, I was doing everything I could. I had consulted the police through the lawyer. And now I had an ally in Kent who would watch Daniel.
It'll be okay. I'll make sure of it.
I took a deep breath to calm myself. Several hours later, as the day turned to evening, Daniel called. Melissa, have you calmed down? Come back. I'm waiting for you, Daniel said in a gentle voice. But something lurking behind his kindness troubled me. Was it sincere? Or was he trying to lure me back to kill us? Bad thoughts flooded my mind, leaving me unable to respond. Amidst the prolonged silence, Daniel, unable to bear it any longer, shouted,
Enough with your selfishness. I'm tired from work and housework.
That's because.
Don't mess with me. How dare you take advantage of my kindness?
Startled by Daniel's shouting, I realized it was hopeless with him. In that moment, my thoughts spilled out as words.
We're getting a divorce. If you're going to divorce me over some trivial reason, you'll have to pay compensation.
Daniel yelled at me. Instinctively, I retorted.
It's not trivial. It's because of the gambling debts you've accumulated. That's why I'm divorcing you.
Daniel fell silent at those words. Perhaps because it was true, he had nothing to say. Taking a deep breath, I continued.
You have gambling debts, don't you, Daniel? Tell me the truth. That's not it. What's not it? You promised you wouldn't get into debt, remember?
A verbal promise before we got married. Daniel seemed to recall it too and said no more.
I'm divorcing you because you broke your promise. You'll hear from my lawyer, so sign the divorce papers. All right, but I won't pay any compensation. It's not about cheating or anything. I'm not expecting any compensation because of the debt. Just stay out of our lives from now on. I'll change everything, the beneficiary of the insurance, and make sure we have nothing to do with each other.
I said this and hung up without waiting for Daniel's response. It was over. I sighed deeply, still holding my smartphone. But the next day, everything changed. After dinner, as I was relaxing with Kayla, my smartphone rang unexpectedly.
An unknown number. I wonder who it is.
I answered the phone, puzzled, and heard an unfamiliar man's voice from the other end. Hello. Is this Melissa Williams? I'm Officer Andrew Miller with the police. Police? The officer explained that because I had consulted the police about Daniel, they had increased patrols in the area. And just a short while ago, they had apprehended a suspicious man in front of my parents' house. Moreover, the man was carrying gasoline, intending to set my house on fire. And we extinguished the fire right away. However, the person claims to be your husband.
My husband! Daniel!
The police were holding Daniel, the suspicious man. I couldn't hide my shock. So, we rang the doorbell, but it seems you were out, so we contacted you by phone. Where are you now?
I'm currently staying at a hotel with my family. Actually, I had heard some information.
I explained the situation to the officer. The story goes back a few hours, when I was preparing dinner at my parents' house. I received a call from Kent on my smartphone.
Melissa? You and your family should get away immediately.
What happened?
Daniel had brought a portable gasoline can used for camping. He said it was for work, but when I secretly checked, it was filled with gasoline.
He might be planning to set the house on fire. That's what Kent said. So, I took Kayla and my parents and evacuated to a nearby hotel. At the same time, I had informed both the lawyer and the police about the situation. And while telling this story, I headed to the scene. Upon arriving in front of my parents' house, there were many police officers present. Moreover, Daniel was being restrained.
Melissa! Explain this to me.
Daniel's voice was almost a shout. But I ignored him and approached the police officer named Andrew who had called me. Is this your husband for sure?
Yes, but there's no mistake that he's also a criminal.
As I said that, Daniel shouted.
Stop it! It's a misunderstanding. Tell them. Why should I? Why? Because it's obvious. Why would I hurt my own wife and daughter?
Daniel said this without a hint of remorse. In that moment, unable to contain my anger, I played the recording. Upon hearing it, Daniel collapsed to the ground.
You wanted the insurance money, right? Well, you won't be getting any. Reflect on your actions behind bars. Wait, please. Shut up. Now you'll live in fear.
Daniel looked puzzled at my words. I decided to explain further.
You wanted to pay back the people who lent you money for your debts with our family's insurance money, right? I'm sure they'll come to collect even if you're behind bars. No way! No!
Daniel began to struggle. Soon, police officers restrained him and took him away. Later, Daniel was charged with arson among other crimes and received a guilty verdict. He is appealing, so the verdict is not yet final. According to my lawyer, the malicious lenders who were demanding repayment from Daniel backed off, likely wanting to avoid police involvement after his arrest. Also, the amount Daniel had borrowed turned out to be less than expected. Either way, we were assured we would not be harmed. The lawyer made that clear. By the way, Daniel and I divorced shortly after his arrest. While I can't expect any compensation, the risk of Daniel trying to take my life is gone. Thanks to that, Kayla and I can live in peace. I also thanked Kent later for his help. It turns out Kent is single and likes outdoor activities, and we got a bit closer. We have a good relationship now. Maybe it could become something more once Kayla is independent. But that's a story for later. After all, the happiness we have now is all thanks to Kayla. I'm thinking of expressing my gratitude to Kayla for the first time.